Welcome to another edition of our series on the psychology of Fountainhead characters, put together by the Ayn Rand Centre UK. And again, we're delighted to be joined by Doctors Bernstein and Milgram. And today we are going to be looking at the supporting characters of the story. And I deliberately used the word supporting, not minor, because I think they're all essential to the plot. They're essential characters to the structure. And, I'm really looking forward to discussing these characters with the two of you today. And I was thinking maybe we should start today with Steven Mallory. And he always comes to mind for me as this really fascinating character. I really always wanted to kind of know him. I always would love to have seen him creating his art. And so I just sort of put it over to you two. Like, what do you want to say about Steven?
Oh, well,
Shoshana,
I guess I'll start. Yeah. I agree. I think that he's a wonderful character. He's one of my favorites also. And I think that when we first meet him, we can see that, well, for one thing, we meet him before we actually meet him, because he's the person who tried to kill Ellsworth Toohey. And I think that's a question in our minds. And afterwards, it's something that he talks about with Rourke. Why did you try to kill Ellsworth Toohey? And he says it's the right question to ask. He knows everything about the beast. So he's someone who, even though his medium is sculpture, not words, he can sometimes come out with something, very, very eloquent statement. And so he's an artist, he's a speaker, and he is someone who very much needs what Rourke has to offer. And I think that that's very powerful in the book, because you look at him and in a way he's a supporting character in the story, but he's also a supported character, in that if he'd not met Rourke, he might have had a very self-destructive life, and a self-destructive life in a way that's a real tragedy, because he can do great work and there would be the loss of the soul of Steven Mallory and the loss of all the great work he might have done. I mean, one thing that really there's so many things about Mallory that I love, but one of the things that I love is that when Rourke goes to see him, he sees that kitschy plaque that Mallory's making of a baby. And this shows you, that he's using his talent for something unworthy of it. And Rourke sees that thing and, he smashes that. He smashes that. It's as if, this is an abomination. It's a blasphemy. He doesn't even ask Mallory's permission. He just does that. And in a way, I think for anybody who hadn't, Ayn Rand said that she had not originally decided on what the climax was going to be, the Fountainhead. But you could say that there's a precursor of that, because if Rourke is going to smash that baby plaque that Steven Mallory's working on, what do you think he's going to do when it's his own work that's getting deformed? Work that's unworthy of him. So I think that, Mallory and Rourke go together, except that Rourke is farther along on the way to identifying the principles needed for human life. And Mallory is still not there. Mallory is still worried, as Dominique was, that evil's going to triumph, that evil runs the world.
Yeah, Mallory, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mallory, I think is a young Henry Cameron, and is on his way to Cameron's fate. I think he would have self-destructed like Cameron did were it not for Rourke. And the reason for that is, I think all three of them, Rourke, Mallory, Cameron, are independent in their thinking, and they're independent in their actions. But Rourke is the one who's integrated that all through his emotional life. And the opinions of other people don't hurt him very much. It's a pain that goes down to a certain point, and then it stops.
It stops.
Yeah. Whereas for Cameron and Mallory, the rejection of society rankles. It just kind of bristles in their soul, and it's painful, and it drives Cameron to drink. And I think Mallory's on his his way to that, to that end also. And then he meets Rourke, and he realizes that wait, it doesn't have to be this way. That I don't have to take social rejection seriously, even though my work is so important. I don't have to take their rejection that seriously. I certainly don't have to I don't have to prostitute my talent to create baby plaques that society will favor. And he sees it in Rourke, the beau ideal of individualism, the integration of independence all through his personality, his character, not just his thinking and his actions, but integrated all through his emotional life. And Mallory realizes from Rourke what's possible, and Rourke really reinvigorates Mallory to take up the battle again, and go out into society and continue to do the great work he does, and find the patrons who will appreciate him the way Rourke finds Heller and Enright and Wynand and Anthony Cord and Kent Lansing and people like that. So Rourke really saves Mallory's spiritual life and probably his career.
Yeah,
I think that's true. He saves, when you say he saves his career, he saves him as an artist. And Mallory as an artist is a really important character because, Rourke is an artist, he's an architect, but the kind of work that Mallory does, conveying the human spirit in, a recreation, that's more akin to literature in some sense. The creation of the ideal man, that's Ayn Rand's business. Now, of course, she's also an architect, and that she builds a world and she builds a story, but Mallory creates the human spirit, people, life as it could be and should be, people as they could and should be. And so in a way, he's another version of Ayn Rand. I mean, Rourke is a version of Ayn Rand, but Mallory is too. And with the despair and the thinking that there's no place for him and that his work will never be successful, that he doesn't belong in the world. Well, it's not surprising that I don't think Ayn Rand ever thought of killing Ellsworth Toohey with a gun, but that the notion of not having the proper appreciation and market for her work, even when she could make it good, that's something that was certainly a thought in her mind in the early years in Hollywood and in the time when she was having trouble getting a publisher for the Fountainhead. So Mallory expresses that, you do your best work and it is your best work and there's no place for it.
I think Ayn Rand would have poisoned them, Shoshana, like an Agatha Christie murderer or something. That's a joke, but obviously Ayn Rand's not a murderer. But
well, yeah, I think that Ayn Rand thinks that if you murder someone, you need to be able to get who needs killing. You can't do it out in the open for everybody to see. Just saying.
Oh, okay.
Not to mention a particular work and a plot spoiler, but she would certainly not be artistically in favor of what Mallory does. There's a kind of self-destruction in what he does, shooting Toohey in a way that makes himself a potential victim.
Yeah. Besides, he admits.
Yes.
But anyhow, all joking aside, because Ayn Rand obviously doesn't advocate murder, but
no, right.
We see Rourke's family. Mallory's his kid brother. Cameron's his father in effect. Wynand, Dominique is his wife and love of his life. Wynand is his soulmate, brother. And we see Ayn Rand making a statement here about family, and that family, because she doesn't show us anything about Rourke's biological family, where she shows us, about Toohey's family and Keating's mother and Dominique's father and stuff. We see the biological family, the other major characters. Ayn Rand shows us nothing about Rourke, and she's making a philosophic point. That Rourke is Rourke because of Rourke. Mm-hmm. Nature and nurture don't cover the waterfront in telling us about character development. Volition needs to be added, and that's one factor here. And also, family is about values. Family is not necessarily about blood. Your blood family may or may not be good people. You don't have any choice in that matter. Hopefully they are, but you don't have any choice in that matter. But by God, you have a choice about the people you bring into your life, the family that you create. And this is Rourke's family, whatever his biological family was. This is Rourke's family. Mallory is his kid brother. And The great scene, Shoshana, we get towards the end of the book when Mallory busts into Rourke's office with the newspaper story about Monadnock being a fraud, and he's like shaking with anger. And you can see he's still affected by the irrationality of society. And Rourke very calmly, considers this, well, we still built it. It's magnificent. They're not going to tear it down, and he brushes the newspaper off his desk and he tells him, he says to his kid brother very brusquely, he said, get out of here, Steve. He says, I have work to do, and he's not good. Rourke's not affected at the emotional level the way, Mallory is by the depredations of society. And as much as he loves his kid brother, his work is more important. Now beat it, because I got work to do. And it's just great. It's pure Howard Rourke, and it
Right.
shows.
And it's it's a version of Dominique too, because he says, when are you ever going to learn? When will Dominique ever learn? And so Mallory is parallel to Dominique,
right?
Except of course he's got work, and Dominique she doesn't have a career in that sense that's sustaining of her spirit and that's productive. But there's a similar sense of that both of them have, that's what's wrong with the world has power, and that Rourke can't beat it. Right. And as you say, Rourke says, come on, Mallory, haven't you learned, get out of here, I've got work to do. And of course Mallory's got work to do too. What I think is really wonderful is the way that Mallory could do in his art what he can't quite do with his whole self, which I think is what you were saying before about how Rourke has integrated everything, and that a man can have integrity as a building can have integrity, and that Mallory doesn't have in his own life the exaltation that he's been projecting, but he can learn that. And that's one of the things that he's so grateful for when Rourke shows up and he says, I wish you'd come when you didn't have a job to offer me, because just, by yourself, you're enough. And that in a way, Rourke is the sculpture in front of him of, the completed ideal. And he sees that and he learns from that. And of course, he can want to be that as well. I think that he really appreciates everything about Rourke in a personal way. Just as maybe even what you said about kid brother is true. A good kid brother wants to be like the kid brother without being exactly a duplicate. I want to grow up to be like you in some kind of essence, but my own way. And that's what Mallory wants. And so Rourke comes to him at a very good time. And I even love the way that when Mallory expresses a kind of self-pity, Rourke doesn't, oh boy, it's not too bad, and comforting and hugs and all of that. The hugs come later, but he says, you're too good for this. I didn't come for your need, I came for mine. And I thought that the harshness in that, which is a kind of cleanness, is waking him up. Remember what's important here. What's important here isn't your sense of despair, it's what you can do, and I know what you can do, and I want you to do it for me. Whatever failures you've had in other people not appreciating you, I appreciate you, and I want you to do your work, because that's what matters. And even when he asks him, okay, now tell me about your work. I don't want to hear about what really counts. I don't want to hear about your friends or your family or your feelings. I want to hear about what really counts. And Mallory says, really? That's really what you want? And with other people, what's most important is not what they want to hear. And Mark says, yeah, I want to hear that. And then he does.
I mean, it's really, I really like what you said right at the beginning, Andy, about Mallory and Cameron, and how in many ways Mallory's like a young Cameron, and Rourke comes into his life and kind of saves him. And I think this is a really good how we could segue now into Cameron, in the way that Rourke comes along. Maybe we might argue a little late for Cameron, but he has a different role. As you said earlier, Cameron is Rourke's mentor in many ways. Cameron is, when I reread The Fountainhead last year, I really focused on the Cameron-Rourke relationship this time. For some reason, it really piqued my interest, and I really liked the idea of Rourke having a mentor and what he would learn from someone who was also great. A great man but also, you know, brilliantly written as a textbook alcoholic. You know, the rage, the self-pity, the visions of the flipping between kind of you know, when you're working with alcoholism, you often notice that an alcoholic will have a certain kind of grandiosity and also incredibly low self-esteem at the same time. And this conflict, you can just see the inner conflict. And I think Cameron, you know, is a brilliantly written character and tragic in many ways. You know, I'm sad for him that he, you know, in a way came. Of course, he could never have, Rourke couldn't have come into his life as a father figure because it's completely, that would be nonsense. But but in the way that he didn't get that, and that Steven does, and also he's he's a brilliant architect, and I just want to wondering if you could both say what Cameron means to you. You know, I just I'll finish off. I think Cameron in many ways is like so many people out there who have been brilliant and are very disappointed. You know, right. I've met a lot of people like Cameron who have been brilliant and burned out.
And notice at the Cortland trial, as Rourke's wrapping up, he's paying homage to all of these creators who've been crucified in one form or another over the centuries. And he says to Henry Cameron, you know, he mentioned it chokes me up. I can't talk about it without starting to cry. You know, he singles Cameron out here, and Cameron is, for all of his flaws and his drinking and his explosive temper and everything, Cameron is Rourke's father. You know, or father figure certainly, and he's got so many virtues that this is the father that you'd want to have. Or certainly, you know, I would have wanted to have Henry Cameron for my father, and I doubt I'm the only reader, who feels that way about him. He is in love with architecture. I mean, he's got that passion for it. That's what he wants Rourke about. He said, they're going to crucify you, because you love your work.
You love it. Yeah,
you love it, right? And it reminds me of what Keating says to Rourke early on, that about how Rourke's opinion means more to him personally than the dean. He says, because I know you know more about architecture than they do, and I know you love it like they never will. Which is very insightful on Keating's part, and it's true of Cameron. He loves it, and this is what he and Rourke. This is the bond, their passion for architecture and for creative work, more broad. I have a friend of mine, not an objectivist, but loves Ayn Rand's novels. He said to me, what I love. He's a philosophy professor. So what I love about Ayn Rand's novels is the creativity, and the emphasis on creativity. And Cameron is a creative genius in that field, but like we said before, unlike Rourke, criticism, rejection from society, it rankles in his soul. It hurts him. It angers him. It doesn't stop at that certain point. For Rourke, it stops at the point of his self-esteem. Cameron doesn't have the kind of self-esteem that Rourke has, and it goes down to a much deeper level. And he gets angry. What he throw an inkstand or something at one client who wanted him to do something and build something he didn't want to build. Was Rourke just said, Rourke says no, thank you, that a Manhattan bank building. Cameron gets enraged and he throws stuff at people, and he makes more enemies. And it only hurts his career all the more. So he's self-destructive in that way, but you feel for him. He's a giant. He's a flawed hero. And the flaw is he is not fully integrated that independence all through his emotional life. But he's a giant. You can see why Rourke goes to him, loves him, reveres him, stands up for him. So she wasn't in the outtake from the Fountainhead where Rourke slugged somebody for insulting Cameron.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think I'm glad you mentioned the moment at the trial, because in fact, he says this is his act of loyalty to the creators. And he says Steven Mallory, and he says Henry Cameron, and he says a man who's in this courtroom and whom I will not name. And all three of them are people who have great souls and who need just what Rourke has been speaking about. They need to know that the individual is what counts, and that all the rest of them don't add up to anything against that, that the individual versus the collective. And they are people who can be individuals without the collective, in defiance of the collective, and have not always known that. All three of them. Okay, and Henry Cameron, one of the things that's wonderful about him is that he makes several speeches to Rourke, and one of them is about all the bad stuff. And, you know, can you picture your life and you're going to cry like a woman, and you know, it's a heartache, and you'll do the great thing and they won't want it. Is that what you want for your future? And Rourke says, oh yes, you know, if I could be what you are, I would gladly be it, you know, and Cameron tells him, don't be melodramatic with standing up and so on. But then later on, Cameron says, what I said to you before was not true. It was worth it. And in seeing Rourke's career, which he has fostered, and he's part of that, even though, you know, Rourke would have been a great architect without Cameron's mentorship, but he's learned from him, and Cameron has some role in that without diminishing Rourke's own role. And so when Cameron sees it, well, I did live to see it. And if you carry those words through to the end, it's like one of those mottos people carve on castles and die for. Howard Rourke, architect, you know, which has a meaning. And then it's brought up at the end of the novel that Dominique sees the sign and she imagines Cameron, whom she never met, saying those, imagines what he would have felt saying those words. So Cameron's, another feature I think that works for that makes him a good character in this book. Yes, he's another version of Rourke. He's another version of Mallory, but also he anchors us to architectural history because of the Columbian Exposition that he didn't want to participate in because too many architects, too many styles. And so, you know, you look at Cameron and he fits into the history of American architecture.
Right.
And it's not science. So this isn't, you know, science fiction, some other universe. It's Henry Cameron and the fate of someone like Louis Sullivan, but not him in character, but that his work was out of time, out of place. I think that you mentioned alcoholism a little bit ago and lack of self-esteem. And that I think is a little tricky. I'm not sure if I would describe Cameron as lacking in self-esteem because, you know, the two parts of that are feeling that you're worthy of happiness and that you can use your mind to do good work. I don't think he questions his talent, and I don't think that he questions his value. What he questions is whether the world is a place where his kind of competence and skill can succeed. So he's, you know, it's like Mallory and like Wynand and like Dominique. All three of them have a certain judgment of how much the world matters to whether they can be all they can be. And Rourke is an answer to that. And that even is what Cameron says. You're an answer to that. You're an answer to everything that's against you. So yeah, I like Cameron. I think also Cameron, as presented in the beginning of the book, when you look at him and his genius and his force up against Guy Francon, it's, you know, I mean, Guy Francon is not even the anti-Henry Cameron. He's nothing like him. It's not even as if he represents conformity, but he doesn't represent everything that Cameron is against. He's just a pleaser, you know, and a goer-alonger. And you can see right there that Peter Keating hasn't chosen someone who is a mentor, but, you know, a place where he can go on being a sponge, which is what he learned how to be, you know, from his mother and from his earlier career.
And you know, a couple of things I really love about Cameron, I think Cameron is a great character. Notice even on his deathbed, he's still mentoring Rourke. He's telling him, you know, watch the plastics industry, Howard. Watch the light metals industry, Howard. You know, you're gonna have to show those fools what kind of forms the human mind has made possible for them. He's still you know, mentoring his brilliant student and, you know, spiritual son, and he tells them, A great plot, what's going to turn out to be a great plot twist, the wine and papers, right? He said that's everything, represents everything that's wrong with the world. You're going to have to fight, the wine and papers and pandering to the lowest, most vulgar taste of the, of the herd, and selling your soul to what Gail Wynand has. It's such a great irony, later on in the story, when Rourke, who's so first-handed, even though his beloved father figure has warned him against Wynand, and even though he's Dominique's husband, he's got reason, to be jealous. Rourke's so first-handed, he looks at Wynand the way Wynand actually is, not carrying this baggage from his relationships with other people. It's just him and Wynand. He loves Dominique, obviously, loves Cameron, obviously, but they're not in the room with him. It's just him and Wynand, and he assesses Wynand for who he actually is, and loves him for who he actually is, despite all of his flaws. But it's a great plot twist that Cameron
Yes.
warns Rourke against the guy who's going to go on to become his nearest and dearest friend.
Yes.
Great, absolutely. I mean, I'm afraid we're going to have to just move on due to time, but
Right. Well, we got a good connection, because that's what cements the relationship between Rourke and Mike Donnigan. I worked for a guy once who understood things. It was Henry Cameron.
nice.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Mike Donnigan is another one of the characters we want to talk about, because
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's a must. Mike is a must.
Yeah. So Andy, you said something very interesting before we started about how Mike is, your kind of moral everyman
At his best.
at his best. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could expand on that,
Yeah.
our audience.
Mike Donnigan is the Eddie Willers of this story, or Eddie Willers in Atlas Shrugged is the Mike Donnigan of that story. These are every man. It could be every woman, different gender, but this is every man at his moral best. And Ayn Rand is showing us you don't have to be a genius like Rourke to be independent. That independence means you going by your own judgment. To the best of your ability, you see with your own eyes, you understand with your own brain, and you judge by your own judgment. And that's what Mike does. He's a construction worker. All of society might venerate Guy Franken as an architect, but Mike Donnigan knows in his own mind Guy Franken's worthless. As society might reject Henry Cameron as an alcoholic has-been, but Mike knows that Cameron is a great architect. And similarly, with Keating and what he sees about Keating eventually, and what he sees about Rourke. And so since the moral virtue that's dominant in the Fountainhead is independence, Ayn Rand stylized this to show that morality is not the province of the genius. There are characters in Ellsworth Toohey is probably more intelligent than Mike Donnigan is. In fact, Ellsworth Toohey could have been, he could have been a contender, right? He could have been a leading critic in a very rational way, had he made other choices. But he's more intelligent. But that's not intelligence is not the same thing as morality. They're separate categories, and they cross-pollinate. You could get some very intelligent, very moral people, some very intelligent, immoral people, some, unintelligent or less intelligent moral people, some less intelligent, immoral people. And I think, regarding the most important aspect of human life, your character, Ayn Rand showing us here, this is not the province of the elite. And Mike Donnigan in the Fountainhead, and Eddie Willers in Atlas Shrugged is Ayn Rand's answer before the critics even criticized her for being an elitist. Thinking that only the powerful or the super intelligent or the highly accomplished were the only ones who count in life. In the character of Mike Donnigan, Ayn Rand showing us morality is what counts more than anything. And this is a completely democratic process. This is open to all of us. This is not just the province of the geniuses or the super talented or the high born or the high and the mighty. This is open equally to all of us. And it's a very noble. Mike Donnigan is a very noble character in that way.
You know what else is interesting? Everything you said is right. I think also that the relationship with Rourke is magic. Just the way that they meet. And Donnigan is inclined at first to think of him as, oh, one of those college educators. What's the expression Ayn Rand has? Someone with a smell of college about him, but who doesn't really know his stuff. And then he sees that he knows his stuff, and it's really good, because that also impresses us about Mike, is that he's the kind of person who cares about someone who knows his stuff, and that he knows his stuff. And then the Cameron cements the relationship. And then when Rourke has to close the office and he asks Mike to help him get a job, and there's something it says something in Rourke's eyes that Mike knew Rourke didn't want him to see. And I thought that was kind of powerful too, that he's going to be discreet about that and not, I don't know, pity him, and doesn't want him to have a job in town for the others to laugh at. And Rourke, there's a sense in which Rourke doesn't care about that sort of thing, but Mike, he doesn't want to see it. He doesn't want to see other people laughing at Rourke. And we're told in the opening scene in the Fountainhead that Rourke could have walked naked in the town without concern. I think it's kind of interesting, actually. I don't know many people who would walk naked through a town without any concern, but I think it's sort of right. Rourke's Lady Godiva, but basically I think that's hyperbole, but it's also true that Mike has a sense of what's fitting, and if Rourke is going to do something, physical, he might as well do it somewhere else. And then, of course, that sets up the quarry and Dominique and everything. And Mike mentions the quarry later on. I think he's talking with Steven Mallory. He says, he mentions the quarry, and he says, what's this about the quarry? And Mike said, well, it was something that bothered me once, and it turned out not to matter.
Right.
So I think that when you talk about them as being friends, it's friends in such a meaningful sense that what happens to Rourke really matters to Mike. And, there are people who are friends that someone else's well-being doesn't enrich them in quite the way that it does here. I mean, they're friends in the best sense. That actually makes Mike's life better when things are going better for Rourke.
Yeah, right. Shoshana, you just said something, about their relationship that reminded me of something at the Cortland trial, when Mike sits next to Mallory to kind of keep an eye on him, remember? And Mallory says, I'm not going to shoot anybody, but Mike says to him an immortal line, I think. He says, a man can't get sick just because he ought to. Which is great line. A man can't get sick just because he ought to. Watching Rourke in and out of courtrooms, when court cases against him, when he should be so widely admired. Yeah, Mike loves Rourke, and I think Rourke certainly reciprocates it. The moral strength that Mike represents, they share in common. The commitment to, they love building right. They love Cameron. They had a lot of values in common.
And I think we could move over to another one of the people we've talked about, which is Austin Heller, who is an intellectual. Mm-hmm. And he's a character Ayn Rand had intended to write more about. She planned more scenes with him, and I think the novel, once she'd finished it, she had to cut it by a certain amount, and she knew what was most important and streamlined in that way. But Austin Heller's a very good character. Someone else could have written a whole novel about Austin Heller. And he was inspired by H.L. Mencken, who's, a household word, an important intellectual, and someone with whom she corresponded and who supported her work. And what Ayn Rand designs for Austin Heller is this great sequence in which Austin Heller is basically saying, I want a certain kind of house, and he doesn't know how to say it because he's not the architect. And Rourke here's what he's saying, and as I'm sure you remember, he fixes the building right in front of everybody and walks out with him. And so, it's kind of like, that's what cements their relationship, is that Austin Heller says, yes, you know what I want. And then they have that conversation about, I knew how to make the house. I knew how to be considerate of you because I was thinking of the house. And yeah, Austin Heller also is an independent person, and he's also part of the courtroom fan club, for support. And you might think that in some other world, what would he and Mike have in common? But they have things in common.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, again, you're right, Shoshana. Austin Hell's a great character. It's just fascinating. It's like all of the good guys in the Fountainhead, they're all so carefully etched. They're all, as characterizations, they're all variations on the theme, of first-handedness. And Heller, of course, is the individualistic political writer, the journalist and commentator. Yeah, I can see some of the similarities with H.L. Mencken. And what does Ayn Rand say about him? He didn't give a penny to charity, but he donated more than he could afford to help free political prisoners all over the world. Political prisoners, people who are in prison because they speak their mind against the dictator. Yeah, they're independent thinkers, and the dictator, incarcerates them. And so he's the fighter against compulsion. Ayn Rand describes him. You see him as a highly individualized, beautifully etched perspective on first-handedness. And of course, he and Rourke share that in common. And yeah, and then again, Rourke's first-handedness, because Heller, of course, warns him against Winan. And from Heller's standpoint, you could understand that Winan is the big sellout. He's a panderer, and everything. And Heller, a man of real integrity. He writes only what he believes in. He stands up for individual rights and against coercion. Winan is dangerous. And what does he say to Rourke? He says you're two different classes of people. No, I'm not speaking Tui's language. He said, right, he's not talking about the class struggle, the owners versus the working class. You're two different classes of people. You don't belong with him. And Rourke says something like, well, I appreciate it, Austin, but I'm going to do what I think is right. And again, he rejects Cameron on this. He rejects Heller. He rejects in this limited way. I mean, he loves these people and they're part of his family, but he's going to make his own decisions about Winan, independent of what his beloved family members say about Winan.
And Heller ends up understanding that Winan is on the right side here.
Right.
Yeah, just when he sees what Winan is doing later, in supporting. And interestingly, of course, it's also true that because Winan is Winan and has his record behind him, his defense of Rourke is not as efficacious as one might wish. But from Rourke's point of view, it's his friend, and he wants his friend to redeem his soul. Yeah, so it all works. Yeah.
Right. What does Heller say during the strike? Something like, I've supported strikes all my life. Yeah. I've stood up against Gail Winan my whole career. But on this occasion, I just say, I'm on the side of Gail Winan. And Winan writes him back a furious note. God damn you, I didn't ask for your support, or something like that. It's great. It's just great stuff. Great story.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important, given the time, that we move on to, I think, a character who makes one of the briefest appearances in the novel, but the scene is considered, it just comes up time and time again, discussed. Other people mention it. In my life, I've reached out for these sort of 3 or 4 pages whenever I've needed to give myself a turbo boost or to lift my morale. And what I'm talking about is what's become known as the boy on the bicycle. And this is a scene that, the first time I read it, it really, really floored me in a really positive, emotional way. And it still does. It brings it every time I read it, I sort of choke up in that positive way. And it's, I see this as the scene of, it's kind of Ayn Rand's hat tip to people who have come before her. And it's also, Ayn Rand is my Rourke in this scene. Every time I'm like, thank you for giving me the courage to face a lifetime. And that, those words are just so incredibly powerful. And, it's hard for me to talk about this scene because it is so emotional for me in the best way possible when I say that. And, Andy, I can see it's it's choking you off, I can see, and Shoshana, I can see you, you know, when we discussed it beforehand, what an important scene this is. And you know, I'd love to hear what the two of you have to say about this.
I read The Fountainhead at 16, and now I won't tell you how old I am. I'm old, but you know, so the spirit of youth. Yeah, it choked me up then. It chokes me up now. The benevolence of it, the inspirational value of it. I think the best name for it is The Boy Who Always Wanted to Write Music, even though it's a longer name, because it captures the essence of this kid who's, you know, been what is that? What's the line from the book? He said, men have found the they have not found the words nor the thoughts nor the deeds, but they found the music. You know, something like that. He's thinking of,
yeah,
you know,
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's thinking about, you know, the Tchaikovsky piano concerto or Rachmaninoff piano concerto. But he said, I want to see it made real in the world. Just show it to me once. You don't have to help me, my brothers or sisters. You don't have to reach out and tell me. Just show me that it's possible. And then he comes across Monadnock, and he sees it made real. And then he meets Rourke, and when he says thank you. Rourke could not have known that he was thanking him for giving him the courage to face a lifetime. Oh God, it's so inspiring. I think Ayn Rand, I'll just say one thing on this and turn it over to Shoshana. I think Ayn Rand had to have known that the Fountainhead was going to have this kind of impact on many readers. And I think, you know, she was in a way. I think this scene is saying, you're welcome, you know, to all the people who were going to thank her for both this book and Atlas Shrugged to Come, for saving their lives or giving us the courage to face a lifetime. And Ayn Rand was showing us, even before we ever read the book or thanked her, you're welcome to this. Was, you know, Rourke's attitude towards the boy, Ayn Rand's attitude towards her readers. It's just brimming with goodwill. You know, it's goodwill on steroids. You know, for human beings at their best, you know, human beings, the love of human beings at their highest and greatest potential, which is just runs all through the book and all through Ayn Rand's writing periods. It's beautifully moving scene.
Yes. Well, I think it is. And she, of course, said that she was both characters in the scene, which means she was also Rourke, meaning thinking of her work as being that kind of inspiration. What we read before about, you know, let me see it real, that's really the heart of it, because Ayn Rand was opposed to the idea that there are ideals over here and there's reality over here, and that they don't meet. And this whole novel is about how Howard Rourke, can be the ideal and also function in the world, and that's where the ideal belongs and lives. Okay, and I mean it's all over Ayn Rand, you know, in Atlas Shrugged also, that the greatness shouldn't be for after our life in heaven and so on, but here now and real. Ayn Rand wrote it. I mean, it runs through ideal. That's the speech that the actress makes about the promise that she embodies on the screen. Let me see it real. What I create is an illusion. And that's what the boy says. I want it real, not just in my head, not just suggested, but real. And of course, once he sees it, he can face a lifetime and make something real himself. Now, part of what's wonderful in the scene, and it really is just wonderful, is that Rourke understands. Rourke didn't read the pages that we just read, but he looks at him and he understands, because the boy is it real? Yeah, it is now. It was an idea and now it's real. And who are you? You know, and what's your name? And he tells him, meaning that a person made it. And I think this is it. It goes along with why it is that some of us at least, are very interested in Ayn Rand herself, that she made it, she did it, she built it. You know, that she was real and that she gave us things that are real. And she's a human being. We're human beings. We're not, Ayn Rand may not have her level of skill and genius and inspiration and integrity, but you know, the world is a place where people can make real things. And the ideals don't have to be sequestered and remote and abstract, but here, you know, what's as real as building? You know, that you can see, you can go into it. It's all there. So it's a beautiful scene.
And I think You might have mentioned it before, Shoshana, but I think it bears repetition that the boy who always wanted to write music could be a young Richard Halley.
Yeah.
Matt
Yeah.
LaShaw
Yeah.
inspired Howard Roth.
And I think we have the idea that, he may be gifted. He certainly is passionate, but throughout the novel, we have people who can appreciate Rourke because they have some love of their own, and that's what he appeals to. And this guy is not even a minor character, but the watchman at the Aquitania, the building that is stopped in the middle, the Unfinished Symphony, and he says to Rourke, right. I had a son once almost, but he was born dead. And that's like a handshake, that that's the best he can say, is that I wanted something once and I knew what it is to want something, and it didn't.
Yeah, the empathy there for my baby. He had a literal baby, and Rourke's building is his baby, and the watchman understands, and there's this bond between them. There's this real caring about creativity, and you're bringing a baby into the world, and wanting the baby in different forms to flourish, and and it's very touching. Yeah, so that's a really touching scene.
Yeah, and Rourke understands what he's saying.
Yeah,
and he understands that Rourke understands him.
Right.
and it comes from love. It comes from a value. It comes from wanting something.
Yeah, he recognized, the watchman recognizes this is Rourke's baby. This is Rourke comes and walks through the unfinished.
Yeah, he's in love with the thing. Yeah, the Enright House.
The watchman gets that, and you're right. Yeah. Rourke gets what he's saying to him when he tells him about his stillborn son. It's very touching. See, Ayn Rand has the capacity to write these powerful emotional scenes in such a muted and understated way. And if you're not paying attention, you think, oh, it's pure intellect in Ayn Rand's novels. There's no emotional vitality. Well, yeah, there is. You have to pay attention. You have to be using objectivist terminology. You have to be in focus when you read an Ayn Rand novel.
Mm. But the boy on the bicycle. Were you that boy on the bicycle, Andy? Shoshana, were you that boy on the bicycle when you first read this?
I don't think she was ever a boy.
You know what I mean. You know what I'm saying. But
girl on the bicycle.
That in spirit, because I most certainly was. And when I talk to other people,
without a doubt,
that
Ayn Rand's novels gave me the courage to. Ayn Rand's novels and the philosophy of objectivism gave me the courage to face a crazy family, and in some ways, many ways, a crazy world. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Shoshana, anything more you'd like to say on this sort of seminal scene?
On the boy? Well, I mean, along with everything else, you can just read it as a masterclass in writing, because the description, we haven't seen Monadnock Valley before. Okay, we haven't seen it before, and we see it through the eyes of this boy who is an artist, but he's an artist in music. And so he describes it as a kind of music, as if the music and the visual are going together. And well, I don't know, it's a hard thing to do in writing, but Ayn Rand makes it look easy. That he looks at this, and it's not just that he sees the greatness of it, but that he can even translate it into the language of his own art form. And they were like variations of a single theme, like a symphony played by an inexhaustible imagination, and one could still hear the laughter of the force that had been let loose on them, as if that force had run unrestrained, challenging itself to be spent, but had never reached its end. Okay, there's the laughter, right? Well, that's where we came in, right? The beginning of the book with the laughter. Music, he thought, the promise of the music he evoked, the sense of it made real. The discipline of reason. Music was mathematics, architecture was music in stone. He knew he was dizzy because this place below him could not be real. But it is. So just the description of it, I mean, it's a description that you can imagine it yourself, but you also see it as he's imagining it, and almost in like bursts of, oh, I see this, I see this. Is that what I'm seeing? So I think it's, along with everything else, it's just brilliant writing, which is why, for example, the Fountainhead is hard to adapt to any other form, because there's a story, but how would you convey this? You know, how would you convey what the boy is seeing? I don't think a voiceover would quite do it. So it's a great scene, but it's one that very much works in literature. And I think it would be hard to imagine how to do it well on stage or on screen.
But it would take a genius director to come up with the way of doing it that we can't make those connections yet.
Yeah.
It would take a Howard Rourke of cinema.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love the scene. Yeah.
So,
Me too.
Let me say one more thing is that it actually comes in the context of, we're going to have the description of what it was like for them all to work on Monadic Valley. And that's a great passage. Okay. Just, you know, the year of eternal spring, when when they just worked, and it was the best year of their lives. And again, this gives you the notion of Rourke also as supporting and being supported by his workers. It's the people who were good and whom he's chosen to work with him on this, and how it was the most wonderful time in their lives. So, you know, the boy on the bicycle sees the end of it, and then we go back in time to see how it was made. I think that's cool too.
If anybody who remained in Rourke's office for a month remained his friend for life.
For life, yeah.
Oh.
Lovely. So, I mean, I just want to thank the two of you again for a fascinating and really enjoyable evening. There are so many other characters we could have spoken about. I'll just mention them very briefly, but you know, we didn't get a chance to talk about Ken Lansing, Guy Francon, Roger Enright, Gus Webb, Alva Scarrett, and even Peter Keating's mother. You know, these are all people that we could spend ages talking about, and such is the richness of the novel, and you know, the characterization there. So again, you know, it's been a real blast and a delight for me.
When we're discussing one of the two greatest novels in world literature, you know, it is rich. You're absolutely right, Josh. There's so much we could discuss in the characters, not to mention the plot and the theme and the way Ayn Rand integrates it all. And as Shoshana points out, the beauty of the writing. But yeah, masterpiece.
Yeah.
One day Ayn Rand will get the recognition as a novelist that she deserves.
She's getting it right now, Andy.
Yes. Oh yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Thanks both of you, and I really look forward to carrying on similar discussions soon.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for setting this up, Josh.
Me three.
Good to see you again, Shoshana.
Okay.